Hello there. Welcome to Storytime Live. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. In particular, when they are finding ways to agree with something that is in there that is actually harmful to other people or to themselves. So, story time started out as a way to promote a book that I recently wrote called Marriage in the Bible. What do the texts say? And I focused on passages relating to sex and the relationship we call marriage and physical harm involving intimate body parts. And then I expanded that this year, at the beginning of the calendar year 2024, and to just biblical passages that I think are really fun to talk about. And today is one of those. So it somewhat relates to marriage in the Bible because I want to talk about the genealogies actually just the genealogy in Matthew. I think I've talked about this before, but I haven't gone in to look at and to talk about the stories behind the women who are listed in Matthew's genealogy. Perhaps a point worth noting, when I used to teach intro courses to just the Newer Testament and the Hebrew Bible, I would bring in a handout in the Newer Testament course of the two genealogies in Matthew and in Luke. And we would spend the entire class period talking about what those two genealogies tell us about what the essence of Jesus is that we're going to get in each of those two, and they are different. And there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to discuss because Matthew starts with Abraham and moves his way up, 14 generations, and then 13 generations to Jesus. Luke starts with Jesus and makes his way back, way past Abraham, back to Adam, and called the Son of God, right? So there are all kinds of things going on just in the genealogies themselves that are kind of fun to talk about. So I think I've talked about that maybe last summer in a story time. But what I didn't do was to spend some time talking about the 4 women who are mentioned in Matthew's genealogy. So I'm going to start out by looking at that part of the story. And we're going to look at some of the story behind the women. There are only 4 mentioned in these two genealogies. There are 41 generations in Matthew and 76 generations in Luke, and there's 4 women named. That's a whole other topic or a whole other tangent that I do talk about in the chapter Making Babies. What does it do to people when you're constantly even talking about generations purely through the males, right? And what does that unconsciously or indirectly communicate to people about women as baby makers if they don't even need to be named, right? They're not even a part of the picture. And it's really subtle and also not subtle at all, right? And so there are a lot of things going on in these biblical passages in the Newer Testament, but we're going to focus on just these women and their stories and why, not that we can know for certain, right? But why, oh dear, what's going on there? Let's try this. There we go. Why would the author of Matthew's Gospel want to name these 4 specific women? So it's not just who are the women and their stories, but why have they specifically been named in Jesus's genealogy? Okay. And I do subscribe to the approach to the synoptics that says that the Gospel of Mark was written first, and that Matthew then worked with Mark, expanded upon it in some ways, and then Luke came after Matthew. I subscribe to that way of looking at things just as a way to work with things. It does, none of the approaches are perfect. And what happens then is you end up making certain claims based on the way that you read the evidence. And so some of those claims can be up for debate. In this case, I don't think there's much to worry about in terms of the gospel. I do think the Gospel of Mark came first. And there's no genealogy, there's no birth story. It is absolutely what you would expect for someone writing something around the time of the war with the Romans in Jerusalem. And so, depending on when you date it, it comes mid-60s. And it reflects that it was written in a time of great stress, right? So I do think Mark came first, and it doesn't have a lot of the stuff, right, that Matthew and Luke do. And so that to me is evidence of some, there's a tradition out there, and now we're going to build upon it. So in my reading of things, okay, so whether or not you agree with me, my reading of things says there wasn't something about Jesus's birth narrative. There wasn't something about Jesus. There wasn't a story about his origins. There wasn't anything about his parentage that was of importance. And this guy was a Jew from the perspective of Mark's gospel writer. And there's this thing going on, and we've got this political thing going on, and this is the thing we're doing. And we're also, by the way, having to reconcile with what, some of the things that Paul set in motion in light of the fact that this is a Jewish guy. So there's this first run at the story of Jesus that Mark presents us that does a decent job of working with those issues. Matthew comes along and adds to it a genealogy and a pretty powerful set of stories that function as what we call a birth narrative. We're not looking at the whole narrative today, but I think it's worth just sitting with for a moment, right? What does it tell you that they needed to add a genealogy and some really interesting, or that there wasn't one there to begin with, and that the one that was added in Matthew is, full of these legendary kinds of stories, making the parallel very clear between him and Moses in several of these pieces of the birth narrative. So there wasn't one there yet. And what is introduced is addressing some important things about who Matthew believed or wanted others to believe that Jesus was. When you talk about the Gospels as ancient biographies, the very opening scenes, or 5 in this case, right, are really important, just like in a book, just like in a movie, just like in a play, right? The opening scenes are important because they set the stage. And so one of the ideas I'm playing with today is this issue of the male parentage of Jesus. And I don't mean through the lens of it being God. I mean through the lens of a first century context where they don't actually know who his father was. Okay? Or that there's some debate. There has been some debate around where he came from, who the actual father was, who the actual dude was who got Mary Prigo. Okay? That, trying to not hold off too much here, that is what we're talking about. And I forgot to pull the book off my shelf. It should be behind me. Yep. Okay. I don't see it. But Jane Shaberg, let me pull it up really quickly while we're here, and then we're going to start with the story time and read some of this together. Let's see. Illegitimacy of Jesus. Okay. No. Okay, let's do this. Let me stop sharing that. We're going to share this one. Hang with me here. Yep. Okay. So, The Illegitimacy of Jesus, a feminist theological interpretation of the infancy narratives, expanded. I don't remember when the original date was. So 87. So I have the expanded version on my bookshelves. So I honestly just take a minute to take this in. The illegitimacy of Jesus. I mean, it got her. This woman was a very brave woman. She taught at a Catholic institution. She was a foster woman, a woman on her own, a single woman who fostered children. this publishing this book, even though she had full tenure, she almost lost her job over it because she was teaching at a Catholic institution. She had death threats, all the things, right? Because she took an honest look at the birth narratives in Matthew and Luke and wrote about it. And one of the things that I think is quite reasonable, not a stretch, but is quite reasonable, is the possibility that whoever this guy was that we're all that we're all assuming these stories point back to, right? Whoever that guy was, as if we know who that one guy was, but let's pretend that we do. And there's whoever that guy was, there are questions around his parentage. And that there's a way to read these genealogies and these birth narratives through that lens that makes a lot of sense. Makes sense of the narratives themselves. So that becomes not just something that people are trying to dance around, but they're actually trying to offer a counter narrative for, or to make it all okay that he was. The word illegitimate drives me crazy, by the way, but that he was illegitimate. It just drives this language of illegitimate when you're talking about a child. It actually doesn't work for me, right? Like, you're a child, you're a human. Like, someone got pregnant. That's like, how does it mean? What does it mean you're an illegitimate child, right? The label itself is so dependent upon the marriage, the institution of marriage, right? And it's really frustrating to me. So sit with that, right? It's a dense read. Not gonna, not gonna deny that. It's a dense read. But it's, if you're interested in a dense read with lots of references to lots of, like, she's got some, really lots of footnotes, lots of important conversations that she's looking at aside from simply the biblical text, right? She did her work. It's worth reading if you're interested in this. Okay, so let's go back to the story. Oh dear, where'd it go? Huh, I have so many things open right now. I didn't realize. There it is. Okay. All right, so we're gonna read through part of this, and then we're gonna go read the women's stories. Okay, so however you want to deal with this, this is the opening. This is the opening line, right? The account of the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. This is a very opening line, and just worth thinking about, right? We haven't gotten. There's no story. This is. I didn't look at the Greek. I have to be honest. So I'm curious what these footnotes are telling us, right? So, a book of the birth of Jesus, the Messiah, right? The son of David, the son of Abraham. So Jesus, son of David, son of Abraham. I mean, we know that there are many generations between Abraham and David, and there are many, many, many between David and Jesus, right? It's not like it's, grandson and son and grandson, right? We've got, even according to Matthew, it's 14 generations between David and Abraham, another, 28 supposedly between David and Jesus. It's not really the way it works. But so this opening line is showing us that we're connecting Jesus through his heritage to two of the most important men according to the Jewish traditions, David and Abraham. Okay. Abraham was the father of Isaac. I'm going to read through this quickly because I do, or skip over some of it, but let me just highlight so you know where I am. Abraham was father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. All of these things are worth talking about that we don't have time to, but Judah and his brothers, right? There are 13 of them, right? And Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Okay. Which way should we do this? Let's stop and do the women's stories as we get to them. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And Perez, the father of Hezron, Hezron, the father of Aram. Okay, so we just got, that's it. That's all we get, right? Is that bit about Tamar. So part of me wants to be like, so raise your hand if you know the story of Tamar. There are two Tamars who have pretty important stories. Yes, that is my point. That is my point, Anina, precisely. Thank you. No child is illegitimate. The child is just a child that was made without the kid having any say in it. Precisely. This is true. I just want to be clear now that I'm looking at the comments. Anina, I hope you know, Anina, that Jane Shaberg, would not have endorsed that kind of language specifically herself, but she's trying to, I think she was using that language to make a point about, why is it not showing up? To make a point for people in the Christian tradition to come to terms with, right? That all of the issues around, Jesus as the Son of God and born to Mary virginally and all this really ridiculous fantasy language that people are then turning into reality. So yeah, I hope, Anina, specifically that I don't affirm using the language of illegitimacy, but she used it intentionally to raise a point, to make a point about Jesus and about the birth narrative specifically, right? As a way to shine a light on how ridiculous, in a sense, it is that we use this language. But so I'm glad that you commented, because that gave me a chance to circle back and clarify. And I'm looking at Vic Litt's comment, probably speaking of illegitimacy in a historical context, right? This archaic thinking, that's archaic thinking to us, but these genealogies are assertions of legitimacy as they think of it. That's a really interesting point, Vic Litt. And also, it isn't just archaic. It is archaic thinking, but it's still alive and well to think about people as illegitimate. I hear that language today, right? I live in a pretty small town with a lot of conservative people, and even relatively progressive people have been influenced by that conservative vibe and framework. And I won't get into all of it, but I hear people still getting really tripped up by women having children out of wedlock, right? Just that. So, and I'm glad, Anina, that you're clear about where I'm coming from on that. Okay, so let's go look at Tamar's. Let's go look at Tamar's story. So there are two Tamars. Yes, I'm going to show these two since they responded, and I did put them out there initially. So I know that anyone, Anina Sharonda says, I know that anyone you reference and bring up in a positive way would think that way. Yes. And then, of course, I also hear it. I wouldn't. Yes, you. Okay. Yeah, right. You just never know what people are hearing today, just so we're clear, right? But I would not say it's exactly forward thinking. I certainly agree with you. All right. Okay, so two Tamars, right? There's Tamar in the story of Judah, which is obviously who we're looking at, and then there's Tamar, the daughter of David, another troubling story. But we're going to go look at the one relevant to Judah, and so there we go. There are actually two parts to this story, so let's go ahead and read the whole thing, or we're going to read. Okay, let's just read it. Let me stop just talking and just do the reading here. So this first part is where we get the one example in biblical content that kind of shows us what a levirate marriage, as it's called. And again, I put it in air quotes because it shouldn't be called marriage. But anyway, what that tradition looked like in this context. And then we get the other part that is being referenced in the genealogy. So let's read the whole thing. Genesis chapter 38. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a certain Adullamite whose name was Hirah. There, Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And I have never gone to look at the Hebrew to know if the Canaanite's name was Shua or if the woman's name was Shua. The daughter was. Anyway, to try to figure out which is which. But anyway, he took her. I do know that says took her, and went into her. She conceived and bore a son, and he named him Again, she conceived and bore a son, and she named him Onan. Yet again, she bore a son, and she named him Shelah. She was in Chezeb when she bore him. Judah took a woman for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's woman and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. It's not even talking about claiming her as your own. We're not doing away with that step of being removed, right? It's not actually even fully a marriage in their context. Raise up offspring for your brother. But since Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, he spilled his semen on the ground whenever he went into his brother's woman, so that he would not give offspring to his brother. What he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Kabam! Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, remain a widow in your father's house. Go back to your father's house, right? Until my son Shelah grows up. For he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. It's not cool, by the way. It's not what Judah's supposed to do. Also, she is a Canaanite. Did everybody pick up on that? Right? The daughter of a Canaanite. So she's not of the Israelite people. Yeah, that's important to the story. In course of time, the woman of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. Oh, there we go. So yeah, we don't know her name, the name of the woman he took, who bore him 3 children. Okay. In the course of time, the woman of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah's time of mourning was over, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira, the Adullamite. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she put off her widow's garments, put on a veil, wrapped herself up, and sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. She saw that Shelah was grown up, yet she had not been given to him in marriage. So she was not being treated appropriately according to their customs, right? When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a prostitute, a sex worker, for she had covered her face. He went over to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you. Let me put my penis into your vagina. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me that you may come into me? Can you imagine if people talked about it like that? He answered, I will send you a kid from the flock. She said, no, not good enough. Only if you give me a pledge until you send it, because I know better than that. You're a sneaky little bleeper. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She said, your signet and your cord and the staff that's in your hand, your identity, in general. Apparently, he had gotten quite aroused in the moment because he was willing to part with all of that in order to, have his way with her. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Bing, bang, boom. Then she got up and went away. Taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the kid from the flock by his friend the Adullamite to recover the pledge from the woman, he could not find her. He asked the townspeople, where is the sex worker who was at Enaim by the wayside? But they said, no sex worker's been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Moreover, the townspeople said, no sex worker has been here. Then Judah replied, let her keep the things as her own. Otherwise, we will be laughed at. You see, I sent this kid, but you could not find her. I didn't stop to comment on the fact that he just, he just did that. And it was okay in the story, right? Like, well, sure, because he doesn't have a wife anymore. He doesn't have a woman anymore. Doesn't matter. There's sex happening outside of marriage, and there's nothing wrong with it. The thing that's wrong with it is just that he got busted, and or that he realized, like, the way this plays out. So I didn't stop to pause on it because it's just it's just so common, right? Men get to live into the double standards, lean into it, live into it boldly, right? And nobody cares. So what he's worried about here, what is he actually worried about? He's actually just worried about being caught having sex with a sex worker. Right. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has prostituted herself. Moreover, she is pregnant as a result of prostitution." And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "It was the owner of these who made me prego." And she said, "Take note, please, whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah acknowledged them and said, "She is more in the right than I." More in the right. Did you catch that? Right? Like, he's not in the right at all. He's not, right? I mean, like, and there's nothing wrong with, by the way, getting pregnant, period, right? She's more in the right than I. That makes me want to say a big fuck you. "Since I did not give her to my son, Shelah." But this is important that he's willing to acknowledge it in the story, that they're willing to say that, right? "And he did not lie with her again." I love that. I love that line, right? Oh, right. So she belongs to his sons, so he's not gonna, anyway. "When the time of her delivery came, there were twins in her womb. While she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and bound on his hand a crimson thread, saying, 'This one came out first.' But just then he drew back his hand, and out came his brother. And she said, 'What a breach you have made for yourself.' Therefore he was named Perez, which is a breach. Afterward his brother came out with a crimson thread on his hand, and he was named Zerah." And you can see in the footnote, brightness, perhaps alluding to the crimson thread. So the question in terms of why is Tamar's story here? She is not an Israelite. She is being treated horrifically, really. Bless any woman who has to deal with a levirate marriage situation and survive that, right? Good God, right? So she had to endure that, and she was put on hold indefinitely. And, this wasn't something that the family had, planned for, prepared for. So she's sent back to live with her father. And then she's not actually taken care of properly by Judah and his family. And so, yes, she does take matters into her own hands to be taken seriously and respected in some level. And so she has children illegitimately. She does get pregnant with a man who is not technically her spouse, right? So there are all those pieces, right? She's accused of sexual indiscretions that don't actually really apply to her. They apply to the man who went into her, I would say. And she was forced into a corner. Like, it's the only thing she had in her own control in terms of a way to handle the situation. So you tell me which of those apply, right? When we're looking at the story, the genealogy of Jesus, right? All right, let's go back to the genealogy. So we had Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez, the second one out. Right? Or is that? No, I've already forgotten. Hang on. No, Perez was the first one out. Okay. The first one to come out, but not. It doesn't matter. But it does. All of a sudden, I got curious because you know how in the Israelite story, they end up blessing the second instead of the first. So the first one came out, and so Perez was the first one who put his arm out. No, Zerah was the one who put his arm out. So Zerah came in first, and Perez was actually second, right? So the first one to actually fully come out of the womb was Perez, but Zerah was considered born first. So this is another example, another generation where the second born is honored instead of the first, right? This is kind of interesting. Just make sure we're okay. Anyway, okay, so let's keep moving. All right, Zerah, Perez, father of Hezron, and Hezron, the father of Aram, and Aram, the father of Aminadab, father of Nahshon, and Nahshon, the father of Salmon, Salmon, the father of Boaz by Rahab. Okay. Salmon. This is so funny the way, as all of a sudden I'm reading this now. Yeah. So Salmon, the father of Boaz by Rahab, and then the very next generation, Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. Okay, so we have 2 generations in a row. So Salmon, the father of Boaz. Let's go look at Rahab's story. Raise your hand if you know what the Rahab story is. And we're going to let me see. Do I need to attend to any of these comments over here? It doesn't look like it. Okay, I'm going to trust that you'll put a little thing on it if I need to come back to a question from you, because since I'm doing this reading on the side. Okay. All right, let's go look at the part of Rahab's story that applies. Which part of it actually applies? There are 2 chapters where she is talked about specifically. So the first is the second chapter of the book of Joshua. And Joshua, son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim, which is where they were hanging out, as spies, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and entered the house of a sex worker. I actually don't know what to call her because I don't know for sure. She's being called a zonah, which is usually prostitute, sex worker, something like that. I'm just going to run with sex worker. It makes me feel less icky than calling her a prostitute, but she runs the house in a way that does make you wonder. But anyway, doesn't matter for the sake of the story. They went and entered the house sex worker, whose name was Rahab, and spent the night there. Yes, I think you should pause and have a little chuckle about why do 2 spies going to check out the city of Jericho immediately go get laid, right? Not a question, really. Not something we actually need to question or wonder about. Also, sex workers hear things, right? So they might actually know things about what's going on in town than that other people wouldn't know. Okay. So I think it's actually really smart, even if it is, selfish, their own pleasure that they're seeking. Anyway, the king of Jericho was told, "Some Israelites have come here tonight to search out the land." And the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab. So is this just a practice that everybody knows? Was he also told where to find them? Like, it's just some fun questions to raise, right? "Bring out the men who've come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out the whole land." But the woman took the 2 men and hid them. So she saw a bargaining chip, right? These people have come into her security and others want access to them. So she's going to work with it, right? Smart woman. Then she said, "True, the men came to me, but I did not know where they came from. And when it was time to close the gate at dark, they went out. The men went out. So where the men went, I do not know. Pursue them quickly, for you can overtake them, I'm sure." She had, however, brought them up to the roof and hidden them with the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men pursued them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords. As soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. They're not getting back in until morning. Before they went to sleep, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that dread of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before you." Okay. I do really enjoy the way so many Christians read this positivistically, right? Like that she actually meant this, right? I mean, there's several layers going on here, right? I mean, this is total propaganda, regardless, right? The book of Joshua is total propaganda. It's not historical in any way, shape, or form. And then you have men telling the story, and you have men telling the story of a very clever woman, right, working the system, but they're putting words into her mouth that I have, until graduate school, I kind of read with the grain and just thought that she kind of meant it. But I don't anymore. I think even in the context of the story, I think she's just telling them what they want to hear, but doing it but the things she's telling them are things that are going to get her saved, right? So anyway, so it works on lots of levels in terms of the story. For we have heard, back to the story, we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no courage left in any of us because of you. The Lord your God is indeed God in heaven above and on earth below. Now then, since I have dealt kindly with you by saving your ass, swear to me by the Lord that you in turn would deal kindly with my family. Give me a sign of good faith, that you will spare my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. That's a big ask, right? Like, that's a big family. Just saying. Good for her, but just saying. The men said to her, our life for yours, right? The 2 of us for your whole clan, right? If you do not tell this business of ours, then we will deal kindly and faithfully with you when the Lord gives us the land. I'm just picturing it, in the context of a movie about, one of the kings of England or something, and how that would play out, and how how a peasant might do that to save their own life, and how that would be perceived by people. Anyway, she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was on the outer side of the city wall, and she resided within the wall itself. She said to them, go toward the hill country, so that the pursuers may not come upon you. Send them in the opposite direction, right? Hide yourselves there for 3 days, until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward, you may go your way. The men said to her, we will be released from this oath that you have made us swear to you, if we invade the land and you do not tie this crimson cord in the window through which you let us down, and you do not gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family. Like, it's not on us, right? If they're out in those streets, if any of you go out of the doors of your house into the street, they shall be responsible for their own death, and we shall be innocent. But if a hand is laid upon any who are with you in the house, we shall bear the responsibility for their death. Which is a funny thing to say, because you can't really be responsible for someone's death. It's too late. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, but if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be released from this oath that you made us swear to you. I love the way there's that, like, that weird, like, that you made us swear to you. Like, she had the upper hand, and he's still being a bit, patronizing. Anyway, she said, according to your word, so be it. Small thing for her to have to do, right? She sent them away, and they departed. Then she tied the crimson cord in the window. She didn't know when they'd be attacking, right? They departed and went into the hill country and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers returned. The pursuers had searched all along the way and found nothing. Then the 2 men came down again from the hill country. They crossed over, came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him all that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, truly, the Lord has given all the land into our hands. Moreover, all the inhabitants of the land melt in fear before us. We're going to jump over and look at the rest of just the one verse in the next part of the story that relates to her, and then we'll move on. This is Joshua. So we have the whole thing going on, 6 days they walked around once, and then on the 7th day they do the thing, right? This is chapter 6 of Joshua. On the 7th day they rose early at dawn and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day they marched around the city 7 times. The first 6 days they just marched around the city once in silence, yada yada. At the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab, the sex worker, and all who were with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers we sent. As for you, keep away from the things devoted to destruction, so as not to covet and take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel an object for destruction, bringing trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord. They go into the treasury of the Lord. This is such a convenient thing to say, isn't it? Everything gorgeous. Everything gorgeous and valuable, that goes to the priests. I mean, to the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpets, they raised a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, right, as it does, right? So the people charged straight ahead into the city and captured it, and they devoted it to destruction by the edge of the sword, all in the city, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys. And it just it catches me every time I have to read that. It's just awful. But to the two men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, go into the prostitute's house, and go into the sex worker's house, and bring the woman out of it and all who belong to her, as you swore to her. So the young men who had been spies went in and brought Rahab out, along with her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. They brought all her kindred out and set them outside the camp of Israel. They burned down the city and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and iron they put in the treasury of the house of the Lord. I mean, there's no reason to waste these. But Rahab the sex worker, with her family and all who belonged to her, Joshua spared. Her family has lived in Israel ever since, for she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. The footnote says she has lived in Israel ever since. So Rahab's story, then, her inclusion in the genealogy is about a foreign woman, a clever woman, a woman who, well, we're told, sells her body to survive. What else? What else do you want to say, right? We didn't even see anything about her getting pregnant. And to be honest, I haven't paid attention if that's in the next chapter too, the specific, bringing Boaz into the world. I'm sure it's in there. I just haven't paid attention. So there you have it. She's a foreigner, just like Tamar. Any comments? What do we have going on over here? Yes, I'm seeing back. This is a few minutes ago. Logan Fisher's comment. I'm just going to put this up because it is making the point I was trying to make earlier. Is this also like Jacob and Esau? Jacob and Esau, that's interesting. Esau, to see it spelled that way. But anyway, I'm used to saying Esau, but sure, who tricked his father into getting the blessing of the firstborn. Jacob and his mother were the ones who tricked Jacob. Let me try that again. Yes, Jacob and his mother, Rebecca, were the ones who tricked Isaac. Yes. There seem to be multiple stories of tricking your way to power. Yes, that's my point here, is to circle back to that. Both tricking your way into power, but also the underling, not the first generation, not the first son in the family getting the blessing, but the second. But yes, Jacob in particular, that is very much a thing about his story. He's a deceptive man. He's deceptive from early on. So I think that's an important thing to point out about his story. Let's see. There's this. They could just accept the archaeology that Jericho was abandoned during the centuries in question, but too many apologists. Sorry. You see, I did that again. I jumped into a conversation. I didn't have the whole thing going on. But yes, there actually isn't in the centuries in question, like in the time frame in question, there's no one living in the city of Jericho. It's fine. Yes. Whether or not. Let's go to the next part of the story of the genealogy. Back to genealogy. Yes. So we just did Boaz by Rahab. I didn't read that part of the story, but I read why Rahab is important, is what I'm interested in doing. I guess I could look really quickly about Bible. Okay. The first time Boaz is brought into the story. So see if there's something about. Oh, no. Not in the next. Wait a minute. Yeah. There's not a reference specifically. Which chapter are we on? Okay. So, yeah. So Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth. So Boaz doesn't come into the picture until really until the story of Ruth. We don't have that narrated. That's interesting. I'd have to go back and look at that. But we're not going to do that right now. We're going to go look at the story of Ruth and and it's a 4-chapter story, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But I do want to highlight a few things here about Ruth and her story. And within the Christian canon, the story of Ruth comes after Judges, right? So you have the book of Joshua, the book of Judges. So Joshua, Judges, Ruth, because they're kind of trying to put those in what would be chronological order. So it's a story that falls somewhere around the time of the Judges. Doesn't matter to me if you know when it was written or when it's supposed to be set. Like, none of those things actually matter to me in the context of, in particular, in the light of what we're doing here today. So here we are. The family of Elimelech moves to the region of Moab, and if you've been tracking these kinds of things, we know that Moab, so of the father, is was what Moab stands for, and Ammon, Ammonites. All of a sudden, I just drew a blank. So both sons are named, both sons of Lot through his daughters, right? So they're both his sons and his grandsons, are named according to being incestuous. They come from their father. So Moab, of the father, so these two groups of people who live close to the Israelites. This is what I'm trying to get at. The people who live close to the Israelites are being given these incestuous origins, which then justifies not liking them, right? And so it's abhorrent to people that Elimelech would go move to all places to Moab. Like, how could he even do that? Wow, that must say something about how desperate they were, or however you want to look at that. But these incestuous bastards, as some have said, there's a reference to them that way. And one of the scholars I would love to have on for an interview, Randall Bailey, had a chapter talking about this issue of how the sexualization in a negative way of a group of people justifies disliking them, and how that has played out over the centuries. They're nothing but incestuous bastards. Anyway, okay, so that applies to the Moabites. So in the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab. It was bad, so bad they would even stomach moving to Moab. He and his woman, and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the name of his woman, Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. Sickly and frail, what lovely names. And they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem and Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and the man of Naomi died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite women. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman, meaning Naomi, was left without her 2 sons and her husband and her man. The verb here actually is not take, but this is the Nasa version. I talk about that in chapter 5 of my book. There's the predominant verb used to talk about marrying in the Hebrew Bible is lakach, to take, but there are a couple other versions of the actions being described, and they're even more, I think they're even worse in a sense, because there's the implication of taking by force in this case. So Mahlon and Chilion took by force 2 women, Ruth and Orpah. So when Naomi started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was living, she and the 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to these 2 daughters, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you've dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your next man." Right? Go back. Don't come with me. That's ridiculous. Go back. Go find another husband. Go find another man. She kissed them. They wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will not. We will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back. Why would you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your men? Turn back. Go your way. I'm too old to have a man. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a man tonight and bear sons, would you wait until they are grown? Would you then refrain from marrying, being taken by another man? No, 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 my daughters. It has been far more bitter for me, having lost the 3 men in her life." I mean, that is pretty intense. I'm not going to lie, right? "Because the hand of the Lord is turned against me." They wept aloud. Orpah didn't need to be told 3 times. She left. She kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. She went back to her family, which is why Orpah is actually held up as a hero for Native women, Native people in general, actually, but Native women in particular, that she went back to be with her people, her culture, her gods. But Ruth clung to her. And so here's where it gets very interesting for people interested in supporting same-sex marriage. There's this clinging that Ruth is doing is the same verb that's used to refer to when a man leaves his parents and clings to his woman, and the 2 become one flesh. So it's the same verb, and it's not a very common verb, by the way. So whatever you want to do with all that is fine. We get Ruth devoted to Naomi and using lines, using words of love and connection and commitment, really, that are the strongest ones of such things in the entire Bible. You don't have any sort of proclamation of love like this anywhere else in the Bible, right? Not just love, but like commitment, right? All the marriages we see, with an air quote around marriage, all the marriages we see in the Bible are forced upon the women, right? And yet we have this between 2 women, being stated between 2 women. So we have, I'm going to switch over to, just to get to the good stuff. The next chapter is where Boaz comes into the story. Naomi had a kinsman on her father's side, a prominent rich man of the family, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabite, we're still in Moab. Ruth, the Moabite, they're back from Moab, right? They're in Jerusalem. But so we keep reminding you, the listener or the reader, that she's a Moabite. Ruth said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose sight I may find favor." So maybe they won't pick everything. They'll leave some for me to get. She said, "Go, my daughter." She went, and she came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. So just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "Lord bless you." And Boaz said, "To whom does this young woman belong?" I just love this. I love how direct and blatant they are, right? I just think we should be really honest about that. And the young man who's in charge of the reapers said, "Oh, she's the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." How many times do we need to say this? She's a Moabite. And she said, "Please let me glean and gather, blah, blah, blah." So she came, and she's been on her feet from early this morning until now without resting even for a moment. Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter," which freaks me out because, he's going to have sex with her in a minute. But anyway, "do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that's being reaped and follow behind them. Don't raise your eyes and tempt any young man to come, force himself on you. I've ordered the young men not to bother you, but don't give them any reason to do so." Because, it's always the victim's fault. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn. And she fell prostrate, very grateful. Why have I found favor in your sight? You should take notice. I'm a foreigner. Boaz answered, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your man has been fully told me. How you left your mother and father and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for these deeds. May you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. And when you're saying that to a woman, by the way, in the Hebrew Bible, may you find favor is a way of saying may you have children. I mean, it means the same thing in their context, even though I don't like that. But it's what they mean. Okay. She said, may I continue to find favor in your sight? For you have comforted me, yada, yada. Okay. And he gives her a lot to eat. He gives her extra stuff. He pays her extra, all these things, right? And she brings it home, and Naomi's like, oh, what? Blessed be, she brings it home, everything he gave her. Blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. And then she's kind of doing this little thinking, right? The man is a relative of ours. One of our nearest of kin. Well, and he was protecting me, right? Telling me to stay close. And Naomi's thinking this through, right? It's better, my daughter, that you go out with his young women. Let's work this one. Let's work this angle. So she stayed close to the young women of Boaz, right? And so, chapter 3 of Ruth is the story of where Naomi pimps her out, sends her to the threshing floor, knowing that all the men threshing have been drinking and Boaz is going to pass out drunk at the end of the night. And she tells her, right? Okay, I need to seek some security for you. So to me, but well with you, which is also a way of seeking security for herself, right? Here's our kinsman Boaz, with whose young women you've been working. Okay, so he's winnowing barley tonight on the threshing floor. Now wash and anoint yourself. Here's your one chance, fancy, don't let me down. Right? Wash and anoint yourself. Put on your best clothes. Put on your favorite perfume, right? And go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, observe where he lies, then go, uncover his feet, and lie down. And he will tell you what to do. I love that. I love that, right? Go present yourself to him. I don't think she's suggesting that she go lay in a tea with Boaz. I think she's suggesting you go pull back the covers of whatever he's fallen, like whatever cloak he has over him, go spoon with him, right? And do whatever he tells you to do. Not like she even needed to be told what to do, right? Because it's not her first time. Anyway, so she went down to the threshing floor and she did as her mother-in-law instructed her. All these things happen, right? Okay, so so they have this exchange, remain this night, and in the morning, if this other dude is going to step forward and take care of you, then that's fine, and if not, then I will. Okay, but for now, just stay here for the night. Just hang out for the night. Why waste a good visit? So she lay at his feet until morning. So are we supposed to still assume this is a tea? I think some people want to say that, and I want to acknowledge that. She laid there at his feet until morning, got up before anyone could recognize her. So I see a way of reading this. It says they did not have intercourse. I do see that. Get out before anyone sees you, because they'll assume that something went down that didn't. Okay. And he paid her in the morning. I think that's so funny anyway. So you can read it however you wish. The point is, when he's shady in the dealings, and then, right, and he finds a way to trick this other man into not wanting her. And so here we go. The genealogy of David, right? I've had countless students without prompting, just comment on how startling it was to see this is the end of the story. The whole point of this story is to talk about the genealogy of David. That's what it's about, right? Women, even foreign women, producing the lineage of Israel. Do with that what you want, right? Boaz took Ruth, right? And she became his woman. When they came together, the Lord made her conceive, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who's not left you this day without next of kin. May his name be renowned in Israel." He shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, which is worth pointing out, is a lot, has borne him. And Naomi took the child, laid him in her bosom, and became his nurse. The women of the neighborhood gave him a name. A son is born to Naomi, right? So we've elided this woman, Ruth, who was a Moabite, and we've made it all okay, or somehow he's taken in as an actual Israelite, blah, blah, blah. They named him Obed. He became the father of Jesse, the father of David. And then we go on to have multiple descendants, right, named as David's genealogy. Okay, so which parts of Ruth's story are relevant to specifically naming her? She's not an Israelite. There's something sketchy going on sexually, right? What else? Because, the child isn't being born or conceived out of wedlock, out of the paired up relationship. So it's not that. So she's a foreigner. There's something sketchy going on sexually, right? Shame bell. I feel like there's a really fun exchange that's been going on in the chatter that thank you, KAC. Next of kin is the terminology that of inheritance. Yes, it is. It's about taking care of this woman, Naomi, who was next of kin. So the man closest in relationship to Elimelech is supposed to step forward and take care of her, take her in. But it does also mean all the things that are part of her inheritance, right, from the men in her family that should have been passed along with them if that still existed, since there was a famine and all this stuff was going on and they had to leave town and come back. So I don't know what kind of what there was actually for her and in terms of inheritance. And I do think, and when you look at the story, Boaz is sketchy in the way he presents the story, because the next of kin, he presents that there's land that is up for sale. He doesn't say Naomi is stranded. He says there's land up for sale. You're next of kin to it, right? It was Elimelech's. Oh, and so he says, sure, I'll take the land. And then he says, well, and you also get Ruth. Ruth comes with the land. And he's like, oh, I can't spare that. I can't divide my inheritance between more children, assuming that that's what would happen, right? There'd be more children. She's not bringing anything with her in terms of a bride price or anything coming with her into that. So it's, however you want to look at that. But I think that's part of what's going on, right? Is splitting things up amongst more people when there wasn't a whole lot to begin with. Right. So yes, it's about inheritance. And women didn't inherit. I don't think that there was, given the way the story plays out, I don't think in this particular situation there was anything to inherit. Right. But and there is that one story of the 5 sisters or daughters, I guess they were sisters to each other, and they contended and went before the men of the land, saying they ought to get inheritance from their fathers, right? From their father, and that happens actually, but in the storyline, but women didn't inherit because, they are property. How does property inherit property, right? Thank you both, Ronan of Stag for the super sticker, and Logan Fisher. Thank you for both of you for that. I'm trying to track with, right. I saw that too, Jackie. I don't know. I don't have the answer to that one. I just found it interesting because she is kind of the inheritance herself, I think is what you're getting at there. She is. It's very interesting. Okay, so there's one more story, and this one doesn't take very long. It's Bathsheba. Let's go back to reading just very quickly. We're going to do Matthew very quickly. So we just wrapped up with King David. So the first 3 women named were up here, right? And then we have David, the father of Solomon, by the woman of Uriah. So Bathsheba doesn't even get named in the genealogy. I just think that's really fascinating, which is why on the thumbnail I put Bathsheba in brackets because she doesn't even get a name. So, the way she's named or referenced here could be part of why, right? So are we well, it doesn't matter, but it is a way of highlighting. You could say that she's a foreigner, right? She's not, Uriah was not an Israelite. He was of a group of people living near who were fighting with the Israelites, right? So David, the father of Solomon is the second son between Bathsheba and David, worth noting. We're going to go look at that story real quickly, and then we'll come back and see what you want to talk about here. The rest of the story. Let's see if I have it up. I do. 2 Samuel 11. I always want to talk about these headings that the committees come up with, because David commits adultery with Bathsheba is accurate, sort of. I'd like to say he commits adultery to Bathsheba, because Bathsheba doesn't have a say. And the issue with adultery, if you're going to bring that language in to point this out, David is committing adultery. Sure, I see that that's the point they're trying to make. And he commits adultery with Bathsheba. But adultery is a thing that a man does to a woman especially at this point in this storyline. It's still basically that when you get to the Newer Testament, though it seems to have shifted just a bit by then. But I can't help it. I want to have a problem with everything, don't I? Nothing is perfect here. So David commits adultery maybe we should just leave it at that. That would be great, right? David commits adultery. What are you going to do with that? In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, everybody cue up something Monty Python, right? David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel with him. They ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon. The thing happened when David rose from his couch and was walking about on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof of a woman bathing. I just didn't read that right. Late one afternoon, when David rose from his couch and was walking about on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to inquire about the woman. It was reported, "This is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the woman of Uriah the Hittite." Hittites are not Israelites. So David sent messengers to get her. She came to him. He lay with her. Bing, bang, boom. Now she was purifying herself after her period, which is meant to cue to us that she's likely within the time frame of potentially being able to get prego. She returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told him, "I'm pregnant." So 5 verses. Bing, bang, boom. Actually, 4. By the way, Kip Davis and I are going to do a live stream engaging an apologist take on David and Bathsheba. We're doing that next week, the 13th, I think. Oh no, on my birthday, August 14th. So then we have this whole thing. So we have David takes a woman he finds beautiful, right? Forces her to have sex with him. He gets her pregnant. And the rest of the story is about David navigating, trying to hide what he's done. And he gets someone else killed, and he's not really sorry for anything he's done. And the child that he impregnates Bathsheba with ends up having to die to teach David a lesson, according to the storyline. Bathsheba is thrown under the bus several times. She doesn't get in, no consideration for what she's dealing with, except that he gave her a week or two to mourn after the death of her man Uriah, and then she's taken into his household. So, I mean, this is bittersweet. Maybe it's if he forced himself on her, now she's forced to go live with him. I mean, she's being taken care of, so just be thankful for that. So many different elements of this story. But Bathsheba, she's named here. She's Bathsheba. Then send me, and then I'm not sure that we see her name ever again. Do we see her name anymore? Right. So this is all about David at this point, and it's all about David, all about David and Uriah. And then when the woman of Uriah heard that her man was dead, right? So Bathsheba, that poor woman. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord, and it's not clear which thing it was, if it was forcing himself upon Bathsheba or if it was actually killing her man. I think it's killing her man to hide what he did, not what he actually did. So there, Bathsheba's story continues because she does with Solomon being decided to be next in line. She does a lot of maneuvering behind the scenes, using her position as the queen mother, or whatever you would call that person. Anyway, the mother to the king. Okay, so that is, that is true. That is a big piece of what I think. Yeah, I'll say that the woman. Oh, hi! I didn't mean to put that up there. Is the woman we're going to engage is a scholar. Like the things she said, I can see that she's definitely taken time with the texts, and I have raised some of the same questions that she raises, and we just answer them differently, and some of them we answer the same. Some of them we respond to very similarly. So I want to be clear that I'm never interested in mocking people. I think I may have come across that way at times unintentionally, or just because I let my guard down. I don't find it useful to mock people. I don't find it useful. Yeah. And I don't think that Dr. Kip does either. I'm just saying that I want to be really clear that we're good. It's a respectful engagement, but it is just kind of interesting that it's coming up this coming week. Okay. Okay. Oh gosh, it's 12 after, 13 after. Okay. So one more time, just very briefly, looking at the genealogy. So we have, I like to have them highlighted, but I didn't know how to do that here. So that's the 4 women who are named. And then we have the rest of the genealogies, and we get all these people, important people, right? Uzziah, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Amos, Josiah, the guy with the famous reform, which is also actually kind of disturbing to me. The reform that he does. Totally just, in the context of the Hebrew Bible, it's great. And in the context of humankind, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific the way he treats the images and the things of other religious traditions. It's utterly despicable. It's just awful to me. Anyway, but in the context of the Hebrew Bible, yeah, he's a hero. And then so all the people at the deportation to Babylon, and then we have. It's supposed to be 14 generations. See, it says all the generations from Abraham to David are 14. You can go count. It is. From David to the deportation to Babylon's 14. Yes, it is. But from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah is actually only 13 generations of people mentioned, which is interesting, and I don't want to make too much of it, but it's also kind of part of the point here. If you count, am I going to be able to do this well without it being weird? Let's see. Jeconiah, 1, 2, Salathiel, Zerubbabel, 3, Abued, 4, Eliakim, 5, Azor, 6, Zadok, 7, Achim, 8, Eliud, 9, Eleazar, 10, Mathan, 11, Jacob, 12, Jacob, the father of Joseph, 13, husband of Mary, who bore Jesus. So that's 14. But Joseph is not actually the one who got Mary prego. I think I did something wrong at some point in looking into this in the past. So my apologies. Although I got it from someone else initially, and then I went and looked into it. So anyway, so the point is here, Joseph is not supposed to actually be the one who got her prego, right? Joseph, the man of Mary, who bore Jesus, who is called the Messiah. So all the generations from Abraham to David are 14, David the deportation 14, and deportation to Babylon to the Messiah 14 generations. So why did the narrator of Matthew's genealogy find it relevant to highlight there are 4 women named, aside from Mary, 5 women named. 4 of them are foreign women who have some sort of sex scandal involved in their story, right? And several of them get pregnant outside of marriage, not outside of what we call marriage. That is not true of one of them. Not so Bathsheba does. So Ruth apparently, right, only gets preggo once she's been purchased by Boaz. But the other 3 are women who were impregnated outside of marriage. They're all 4 are foreign women. And I know that a lot of people within the Christian tradition, at least, and even within the Hebrew Bible tradition, reading positivistically, right, want to make a big deal that God is using even foreign people, which is, I do this because even the lineage of any of these generations, right? Where do these people come from, and how do we decide that they're one of these people or one of those people? But anyway, so within the Hebrew Bible, it plays well to say that these foreign people have been taken in because now they worship our God and now they're part of us, you know. And Christians have played along with that storyline as well. I think it's more about some form of this issue of the women. Well, anyway, it doesn't really matter what I think. I mean, I do think that it's the illegitimacy piece is being highlighted, but that's not consistent because it's not true of Ruth. But anyway, what Jane Shaberg is talking about in her book, The Illegitimacy of Jesus, is just that. Why are those 3 or 4 women pointed out? Why are they specifically pointed out in this genealogy? What's brought into his genealogy are these foreigners. We've got sex scandals involved. So God's making all these things right, in spite of there being some question about Jesus's specific, very direct parentage. That's the way that I gosh, there's a lot going on over here in the chat. Sorry, I just got distracted by that. That's how I read it. I read it as the sex scandal, not just that they're foreign women who have been brought into the people of God and happen to contribute to the creation of the men of Israel, which is also part of the story, right? They happen to be perpetuating the lineage, right? So they're important because they contribute to the patriarchy and the men within Israel. But there's also the foreignness and an element of illegitimacy that I think is a part of their stories as well. And that's what Shaberg is talking about, right? And then she gets into the history and the context and all the different language around being used later in Matthew's narrative when it talks about how Joseph responds to Mary being pregnant, which is different than the way it's handled in Luke's gospel. All of which Shaberg thinks or thought points to this idea that there's a question afoot. There's a question out there about Jesus's, air quotes, legitimacy. Who is the man who impregnated this woman? Who is the actual man? This is predating any kind of the belief in an actual, like, you know, there's stories of gods impregnating women, but somebody actually got the woman pregnant, right? You know, so it's like, even when it takes a couple centuries for this this belief that the woman is actually impregnated by a god, like for that to really take root. I mean, you look at Luke's genealogy, birth narrative, and it sounds very threatening. You know, the Holy Spirit is going to come over you, will overpower you, and you will give birth, you know. Very scary. So, you know, in the context of first century gossip, right? What is the author of Matthew's gospel trying to address? What concern, what question, what gossip is trying to be head off, right? Or cut off at the feet, or whatever you want, you know. I'm mixing my metaphors, but I think you get the idea. And I think we should, I mean, honestly, I think it's not just more interesting because, you know, sex is kind of fun because it's not talked about well at all, in my opinion. I do find it kind of fun to talk about because It's just a natural part of most humans. Not everybody wants to have sex, but most humans are interested in it. And it's just a part of being human. It's not this thing that should only be, that only belongs in one particular kind of relationship. It's a part of who we are. And so, to see that even the gospel writer himself or themselves, whoever, for collective or whatever, right? Even they were trying to silence some gossip about his parentage. And this is how they chose to do it. I think that is a very reasonable theory to suggest in terms of why those 4 women are specifically pointed out as being in Jesus's genealogy. What do you all think? Should I read back into this chatter? Because it's always fun. A king does fetch people. Yes, had to her yes, maybe Mary counts as a generation for this author. Yeah, no, it's a good. I think. Do I need to recount that? Count that again? I feel like they're Jeconiah. Oh, right, because Jeconiah was counted in Babylon to the Babylon. So that's why there's only 13. Yes, he's already counted. So 1, Salathiel, Zerubbabel, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Yeah. Yeah, it's not it. No, so it's really so Joseph is with Mary, but there's another dude involved in there who got her pregnant. That's how I've heard some people try to handle that weirdness with the numbers. But anyway, why would it not matter what you think? Thank you for that. I actually was like, well, people are here because they're curious what I do think. So I even as I said that, it doesn't matter what I think. I was like, oh, well, you guys are here because you're curious at least. So thank you for saying it, Anina. Jacob celebrated for genocide. Oh gosh. I'm just going to put this up there because thank you for saying it. Jacob, Joshua. I think you mean Joshua, but that's all right. Josiah for consolidating power via cultural genocide. Yes, exactly. Joshua, the book of Joshua. I mean, I think of how many people I know as adults who as children acted out kind of this circling the city of Jericho, pretending the walls fall down and then attacking the city. I don't know to what extent they attacked the city, but they celebrated that the walls fell down, right? And the walls came tumbling down. Yeah, so that propaganda is just deeply ingrained for these children, especially when you put it to music. It's like it's never leaving, yeah, just forget about all the things, all the people they're killing and all the stuff, the conquest, genocidal conquest for sure, town after town after town. And then Josiah. Yeah, okay. Yes, something. So this is an interesting observation, Carrie Ann Chrysler, right? What are we saying about Mary? If she's the only one of the 5 who isn't a foreign woman, or are we trying to highlight that? Do we actually know where Mary came from? I mean, in the context of the story, no, we don't. There's later the proto-evangelium of James, which is the story that gives us the backdrop for the idea of the Immaculate Conception and the perpetual virginity of Mary. So it's a really fascinating story if you can stomach it. In terms of the birth of Mary to her mother Anna, and Anna was also thought to have been. It was a special pregnancy to bring Mary into being, and Mary was then handed over to the temple, right, given to God, handed over into the temple, and when she started her period, had to leave because then you were introducing blood that came from a woman, not from slaughtering an animal. So we can't have any of that blood involved in the temple because that makes you impure. The blood that actually indicates someone can give life makes you impure, but the blood that comes from slitting the neck of an animal, that makes you pure. Yeah. So yeah, when she started her period, she had to leave, and that's when Joseph purchased her, according to the Proto-Evangelium of James, and so she is special. That the Immaculate Conception is actually about Mary's conception, and delivery and all that. And then when at the end of the story, when Mary delivers Jesus, they have a midwife come in and stick her hand up the now slightly loosened vaginal canal and check that to see if that her hymen is intact, which is physiologically not even real, but because there are these ancient beliefs about it all, people believed that it was a thing, that a hymen would be intact, as in fully covering the opening. And there are people, who think about the hymen as something that has to be penetrated the first time a woman has penetrative sex. It's not, but it's a thing. It's a thing people misunderstand. So the part of the story is that this woman, I've forgotten the name of the midwife, but she sticks her hand up just to make sure, to prove that, so everybody knows that the hymen has not been penetrated by the birth of this child who just came through vaginally into the world. So much fantasy. Okay. I don't see any specific questions. So I'm just so thankful. I'm just thrilled that there's still some people here hanging in with me. Gone on for an hour and a half. Thank you. Last chance for a question. And then I'm wrapping up for the day. I am very much looking forward to having a conversation with Kip. He and I have not done a conversation together, just the two of us. And it was such a treat, my honor, that he invited me to do one with him next week. So thank you, Kip. I know he's still here in and out. Thank you for that, Kip. And for those of you who know Dr. Kip, might want to come watch us or hang out or check it out later. As soon as there's a thing on YouTube, I will share that on my. All right. I'm just gonna, okay. So thank you all. I don't know, was that helpful to do this, to talk about the story, the backstory of all these women? I think it's interesting. I think that their presence specifically being named in the genealogy is not a mistake. That is bottom line, right? It's not a coincidence or a mistake. What is it that it communicates to you? That was my question. And to me, it says that there's a question out there floating around, a question or a conversation or even a lot of gossip around this issue that they're trying to put to rest in some way, shape, or form. And I find that actually kind of a little bit delightful, to be honest, that, that there was some gossip floating around about the illegitimacy in that context of Jesus. And I don't think that the genealogy does away with that. I don't think that the genealogy clears up in Matthew who the father of Jesus was. And they would have wanted to know who the man is that got her prego, right? And it doesn't tell you that. And I think that's kind of fun. We obviously get the story, in Matthew, the angel Gabriel comes to Joseph. In Luke, the angel Gabriel comes to Mary. Kind of fun there. But, he comes to Joseph and tells him not to worry because the child, developing in Mary is, we didn't look at that. Should we look at that real quick while I still have everyone here? Let's go look at that real quick. Matthew, gosh. Oh, it's still there in chapter 1. Matthew helps to spell it correctly. Let's look at that real quick. It's funny, I didn't think to do that. So we have the generations. Okay. And then now the birth of Jesus took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, but before they lived together, which is a really fascinating little aside that they include, because even in first century, in that part of the world in the first century, some Jewish people, especially if they were in the more urban contexts, did live together for a year after being engaged. So this is a relevant thing to highlight, right? But before they lived together, she was found to be pregnant from the Holy Spirit. This is a claim being made, right? Her man, Joseph, being a righteous man and unwilling to expose her to public disgrace, planned to divorce her quietly. And Shaberg goes into that in the book, talking about what's going on here. Right? It's his being righteous, and this is an and, not, like being a righteous man, he gets to get rid of her if he wants to, but he's also not willing to expose her, right? So to disgrace, that's not saying his being unwilling to expose her to public disgrace is not about being a righteous man. He, by law, was allowed, right, to do this, but he was also kind. So he planned to do it without making a big hubbub, right, is what this story is saying. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, because God speaks to people in dreams, and said, Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your woman, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. So we just had 4 different generations of Jesus's genealogy that were, 3 that were, quote, illegitimate, air quotes, and that are kind of claimed, right? Kind of in their framework made okay, right? Because they're folded into the storyline naturally and nicely and all that stuff. So when you say this, this is part of what Shaberg talks about. This language, the child conceived of her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you're to name him Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. I mean, there's so many things going on just in these 2 sentences, because to say naming him Jesus, for he's going to save his people, those 2 don't go together. Jesus doesn't have to do with Savior, and you are to name him Jesus, but then we have this, name him Emmanuel. So what the hell's going on here? All the things. And then also, and I've done this elsewhere. I don't want to take the time to get into it right now, but I'll give you the shortened version here. This is quoting from Isaiah 7 verse 14. And in that context, this is saying there's a young woman who is already pregnant. And by the time she gives birth to the son, right, there's a young woman who's pregnant, and by the time this, the son that she's going to give birth to grows up to be about 8 to 10, the people you're afraid of are going to be no more. This is in the context of Isaiah 7. There's the king of Judah is freaking out about his neighbors and potentially the people of the relatives of the kingdom of Israel in the north conquering and taking over his land. So he's freaking out, and so God is giving him a reassurance. And so this is entirely quoted out of context, and you have issues related to translations between languages, obviously, because translations are between languages, but things are gained and lost in the translation effort here, that, again, I don't want to get into it now because I've done that elsewhere, but it's really just kind of fun and interesting that this doesn't say what people think it says, right? But also funny because they're quoting that as a way to make a connection to Jesus's heritage, and yet they don't name him Emmanuel. And the name Jesus isn't anywhere close to Emmanuel. Like, it's not like a different name for the same concept or something. No. So what the hell's going on? Anyway, when Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took her as his woman, had no marital relations with her until she had given birth to a son, and he named him Jesus. And interesting that some traditions say firstborn son, which messes with the Catholic ideas that Mary also had other children. I want to get into that. So part of what Shaberg is talking about is this language of saying the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. That's a way of saying God is behind this, or is blessing this, or is giving it God's, seal of approval. It's not the same thing as saying this is a miraculous conception. It is not the same thing, right? Not at their point in time, at least. And so through centuries of interpretation and beliefs, fantastic beliefs, people read that to be, see, the angel is saying this is a miraculous conception. No, the angel is saying there's a woman who's pregnant and God is going to make it all okay. That's what it's saying. It's from the Holy Spirit. It is something that God is approving of. Very different than saying God has impregnated her. So she gets into that in the book, as well as fully going after things in Luke's genealogy as well, or birth narrative as well. All right, so that I think is probably helpful. All right, now it's time to go. Thanks for hanging in there with me, those of you who did, and thank you so much, those of you who wanted to be here and were able to be here live, for joining me live. I very much appreciate it. Appreciate all the things, the ways that you all support me in liking my videos, telling a friend or two about my videos, subscribing to my channel. I'm very deeply grateful to those of you who support me through Patreon. You can support me at Biblical Bird, Patreon at Biblical Bird. It's for as little as $3 a month. I'm just grateful because I know that people do what they're able to do to support what I'm doing and to help others find the work that I'm doing. And so I'm grateful to you for that. And so have I said that I'm grateful? I think I have. Okay. I think we got that in. I'm gonna close it out. And next week, I actually have a friend, Heather Hamilton, coming on to talk about her book, but really to talk about the way that she reads the Bible, which is really fun, as essentially through the eyes of a mystic, which is, I read about the mystics in seminary, read several, parts of some of the writings of the mystics when I was in seminary. I didn't connect with it, but I tried to understand it on its own as best as I could. And the first time I heard her story, which was just last year, actually, just last June, I met her and started hearing parts of her story. I was like, oh my gosh, you are a modern day mystic. Like, has anyone ever told you that? Like, you're a mystic. Like, that's amazing to me, because I kind of just think of that as a thing of the past that happened in a part, like kind of an era of the church that kind of made sense of that. But I don't know that it says, and I don't know that she even identifies as Christian anymore, to be honest. Maybe she does, but she's much more of not about the label, but about reading these texts in a way that are helpful. So it's going to be a really fun conversation with her next week at Storytime Live. And then the week after that, I'm going to circle back to this no child sacrifice and Molech thing. I want to do a quick thing with you all on that. So we'll do that in a couple weeks. And then I have another scholar friend coming on, Shelley Matthews, at the end of the month. So some fun story times to look ahead to. So let's go out with this. I will see you next week. Thanks.